Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT ONE, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guest today is Timme, CEO of FinListics. FinListics provides analysis of customers to help enterprise sales organizations harness and leverage the power of insight-led selling to engage prospects with value-driven narratives. In this talk, we discuss the need for technology sales teams to adopt an executive mindset and learn to communicate value rather than features. We also explored the challenges of selling a value proposition around strategic objectives rather than improvement of hard KPIs that could be quantified in a business case. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research strategy or training initiative that you'd like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you. Stefan, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for everyone that's listening to this. I know you got very busy days, so Eric and I will work very hard to make sure you get a good return on your investment of time.
That's certainly the right way to start this conversation. So that's maybe a good place to actually begin, Stefan, is understanding your focus on return on investment and where did this passion come from? Because you've now built a business around that that topic that you've been running for the past 20 years. But I imagine there was some backstory that led you into this path.
It's a really great story. So I studied finance as an undergraduate, and I was so blessed to have a couple of professors who literally changed my life. And so they not only taught you all the textbook stuff, but they did a lot of consulting. And it was always about how to help companies be better, how to help them be stronger financially. And being a finance type, I'm not saying that's the only perspective in the world. But yeah, if it's not adding to the top line or the bottom line, it's really a nice to have. So I became very passionate about that. I was very, very fortunate. I got my PhD in finance. I ended up being a professor of finance at Emory University here in Atlanta, where I live. Very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of companies, usually brought in by the CFO, but I would work in operations. My job was to work with sometimes plant managers saying, hey, you got all these great ideas. Here's how you add to the bottom line, or product development. Here's how you add to the top line. And just, Eric, by just pure chance, I was doing this open enrollment workshop, and a guy from this software company said, hey, have you ever applied this to sales? We push feature and functions, but what buyers really want is, what am I going to get cash flow wise and what am I going to get ROI wise? So I've always been very passionate about it because I think that finance is it's a common language of business, and it can not only help people in their business careers, but I got all kinds of examples how it's helped them in this personal career, personal life. So I've been passionate about it I got my PhD in 82. It's been 40 years. It's hard to believe. But anyway, yeah, so very passionate about it.
Yeah, and that transition makes sense because this is basically two sides of the same coin, right? You have the guys in the plant who are trying to figure out how they translate some improvement in a KPI, OEE improvement, whatever that might be, or into a financial benefit. And then you have companies that are trying to sell technology to those plant managers who, again, have to make that case, right? They have to somehow say, we're going to help you improve this part of your operations, and it's then going to have a financial impact. But yeah, typically they somehow don't get to the financial impact. They focus on maybe they focus. I think a lot of cases they really at least I think about it in terms of 3 tiers, right? First tier is, here's our technology. Technology is great. Then the second tier is hopefully they get to some kind of operational KPI at least, and then the third would be the finance. But maybe a good place to start is with the mindset, right? So the mindset of a sales, kind of a technical salesperson, the mindset of a manufacturing engineer, for example, or an operational person, and then the mindset of an executive. How do you think about the differences that these people tend to have?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, because you think about, especially if you're in manufacturing, right? And of course, IoT applies to all kinds of different industries, but you're absolutely right, because a lot of times you're dealing with engineers, very, very bright people, And so you mentioned OEE as an example. Like we want to have the highest OEE in the industry, which is great. And then you've got the folks from, like, for example, Rockwell Automation, saying, okay, we can help you put in these sensors. We can help you do all these things. But then at the end of the day, you're asking me to invest, or now more and more it's on a SaaS type model. So it's invest as you go. But ultimately to say, okay, we're going to make this decision. Okay, we're more efficient, but what does that mean in terms of, for example, lowering manufacturing cost? Or let's say you're in consumer products, you're making cheese or wherever it might be, you're going to increase capacity utilization. What does that mean in terms of increased revenue? So, those connections are being made more and more, but that's one of the things that we really focus on is, hey, we love the engineering stuff. We love the operational stuff. We love efficiency. But at the end of the day, you're asking me to invest. I better see some type of cash flow benefit and some type of return. So, but there is a convergence going on there, because more and more people are saying, this all sounds great, but what is the financial benefit? Not just the business benefits, but what are the financial benefits?
I think one of the challenges that salespeople have is that, if you're selling an enterprise software solution or, technology solution, you're not selling to one person. You're selling probably to 5 different people at different levels of the organization who are either the direct buyer or an important influencer, and they all have different backgrounds and different priorities. That's a very challenging, situation for a salesperson to be in. So how do you think about how a salesperson can approach this challenge of selling to different people, maybe at different points in the sales process, who have different perspectives?
Great observation, because Gartner came out with a study a couple of years ago that said, for a lot of these major purchases, there's now 10 plus different stakeholders, right? So now I'm selling, let's say I'm selling some type of IoT solution that's not going to reduce costs, but is also going to help me increase capacity utilization. It's going to help me better manage inventories. So I just named 3 different people. I got to talk to the operations people. I got to talk to marketing and sales. I got to talk to distribution and logistics. So one of the things that we recommend and we provide is to say, they're all aligned with the same goal. That's great, right? Let's grow revenues. Let's improve return on capital by doing these things. But you really got to tailor the message for each one of those 3 stakeholders I just mentioned. So a big part of that is a generic message is not going to work. If you were to go talk to sales and say, well, here's how we're going to improve your capacity utilization, they may not even know what that means, right? So what we have to do is break down each one of those stakeholders and say, well, what are their initiatives, and what is their dashboard, or I were just talking about, what are their operational KPIs? So for sales, I'd have to talk about, we've got a solution, and we know that you're really focused on bringing new product to market, or you're trying to reduce stockouts, or you're trying to increase cross-sell, upsell. Where I'm talking to my friends in manufacturing, right? They're going to want to know things like, well, what are things like materials, labor, and overhead, per unit? What is unplanned machine downtime, by unit? And then if we're talking to our friends in distribution and logistics, who we can also help, they're looking at other things like on-time deliveries, or looking at logistics costs. So what's really required is to understand for each one of their buyers, what are their initiatives, or I like to call them use cases, and what's on their dashboard. So you can be providing a solution that can address, in this example, all 3 of those. And one of the things that we have found is when you really start thinking that way, as you said, some are influencers, some are actually the buyers, you can really get larger deals. You can do less discounting. You can become more of a partner as opposed to a vendor.
So that makes sense. And then you come to the implementation of it, which means that, you have different ways that you communicate, everything from your elevator pitch when you meet somebody first at a conference, to your, how you communicate in email, to your company intro deck, to the sales presentation. Then you have to kind of figure out, okay, how do we manage this portfolio of communication materials, which on the one hand, we want to standardize, and on the other hand, we need to tailor. So how do you do that tactically?
Well, tactically, it's a team sport. I mean, because Forrester came out with this study that said that executive buyers think 80% of sellers don't understand their business. So it's a team sport. So you have to have sales enablement, for example, that's helping them do this kind of thing. You need to have the industry experts. You have to have your use case experts. You have to have sales leaders that reinforce this. So for example, on the quarterly business review, okay, What new sellers have you, buyers have you talked to, and what's the messaging? So it's really that establishing the baseline, which is a lot of work. There's no question about it. If you look at an industry level, it's a lot of work. The good news is it's scalable across a whole bunch of companies in that industry. But if you don't have sales enablement, providing that constant nourishment, if you do not have sales leaders doing the reinforcement in terms of like the quarterly business reviews, making it part of the account planning. I ask companies all the time, they'll say, oh, we're customer centric. And I ask them, well, okay, well, how much of their goals and strategies and individual buyers do you have in your account plans? And I got to tell you, the vast majority say, nah, not really. I said, well, then you're saying customer first in words only. You're really not customer first. It's got to be a team effort. It's got to be a commitment. The CEO has got to be, here's how we think about the world. If not, you can spend a lot of money. You're not going to get a lot of results.
Okay, so I want to approach this maybe then from just to get a bit more to the details from two perspectives. One perspective is the material that a company is preparing and presenting to their customers, and what should that portfolio look like, so that again you can balance this tension between, on the one hand, having standardization of how we communicate, but on the other hand, having documents that we know are targeting different stakeholders. So 'cause that's a little bit messy. And then the other perspective is, as the salespeople are collecting information, right? Every time they have a conversation with a customer, they're collecting information around what does this customer prioritize, what are their strategic objectives. How do you aggregate that into a format where you can over time build up a better understanding of the customer, as opposed, so you can really be customer centric, as opposed to just saying we know where they are in the funnel, because I feel like that's also a big weakness for a lot of companies. But maybe we take those one at a time.
Yeah. So the first part, what I recommend people do is build an industry playbook. And to do that, it starts off with, okay, what are the common goals? So for example, in consumer products right now and other industries, what they're saying is, hey, we want to improve operational efficiency. In fact, there's one I know of that have said, we want to improve operational efficiencies, not just in operations, but in finance and accounting and all these other areas, to generate $600 million in annual cash flow benefits that we want to put back into the company. Okay. So the first thing I recommend is pick a couple of your industries that are really key, maybe not all of them, and find out, what are the most common goals, what are the most common strategies, and then really start thinking about this from the perspective of the customer, which then says, okay, I'm the CEO, I'm the CFO, we want to take $600 million out, and Eric, you're in supply chain, you get $200 million of that. You're in general administrative, you get another $100 million. You're in manufacturing, you get the remainder of that balance. And so it's one to don't think about solutioning quite yet. Just really focus on what are the most common issues within the industry, and then start thinking about, well, who are all the people that are involved in that? And that's why I like talk about this thing. It takes a village, right? Because not one group can do this, and they can't do it by themselves. So then start really breaking that down into doing some research. And that's actually one of the things we provide for about 25 industries. But it says, okay, within manufacturing, what are their 10 key initiatives, right? Oh, in general administrative, what are their initiatives? Distribution logistics, what are their initiatives? And then breaking that down into, as I mentioned earlier, their KPIs. And then start thinking about your solution. And what I always tell people first, don't jump to the numbers first. I'm a finance person. People can't believe I ever say that. But now start thinking about those different use cases or initiatives. Start brainstorming around, okay, what they're trying to do is reduce unplanned machine downtime, as an example. Well, what are the couple of things that we could do around that, in terms of, the sensors, okay, the motor's going to go out faster than we thought, whatever it might be. So what I really recommend people do is come up with the standardized how statements, how we can help you reduce unplanned machine downtime, how we can help you reduce stockouts, how we can help you improve, on-time deliveries. So really get that message down. And Eric, what you find is once you've done that, you can be talking to dozens of companies across an industry. They do have these common initiatives or use cases. And now what you've got is a portfolio of how statements that are relevant to these individual stakeholders. So it's not an insignificant investment. I tell people that all the time. But nowadays, given what executives want you to tell them. So, for example, I wrote a book last year with my co-author Melody Ashley, and we interviewed like a dozen executives. And one of the top things they told us is, tell me something you don't know, show me the business and financial benefits, and make my life easier. Well, if you don't have a customized message, it's just so generic. It's not even meaningful. We can help you increase revenues. We can help you reduce costs. What does that mean? So you have to make that investment to help sellers be successful. You've got to be on top of the industry because we know the world changes. So how do we change those house statements?
So you have a house statement, and then you ideally would want to translate that into some kind of also financial benefit. I guess ideally you want to do this as precisely as possible, right? Which means you have to some extent extrapolate from maybe past cases. So we helped, we've done this for 15 companies, and here was kind of the average benefit that they received, and then you can maybe communicate that. But every company feels like their situation is unique, so they might kind of push back against that. So how do you how do you translate this in a way that is credible to the customer and doesn't feel like you're just kind of throwing a random number, like, hey, we can save you 10%, whatever. It's just kind of a random generated number.
You've got to have those case studies because that's what executives focus on. Tell me where you've done it before. Because you can throw all the math out there you want. They're going to, okay, great. Have you ever done this before? So tell me in our industry, ideally, where, for example, you have increased capacity utilization. How did you do that? Here were the bottlenecks. Here was this and that. And then what I suggest people do, because things, in most industries, if we're thinking about manufacturing, they don't publish capacity utilization, right? I mean, oil and gas does, like here at the refinery or whatever it was. But the vast majority, if you're looking at like a Colgate Palmolive or you're looking at Procter & Gamble, you're nowhere going to find in their discussions, here's our capacity utilization. So what we do is we say, for starters, there's sources of, here's the average capacity utilization for someone in CPG as an example. So what we recommend you do, tell the house story, build credibility, then apply an industry average. And if you want to say, on average, we've done it 3 to 5%, or what we talk about is this power of one, for a company your size, each 1% improvement would be worth 50 million. You do not say up front, oh, we're pretty confident we can save you this much money. You don't know them yet. So I agree completely with what you just said. So we recommend is you tell a strong house story, you rely on some industry averages around KPIs, because we all know that these buying groups are like 70% down the buying cycle before we even talk to a seller. And then say, look, here, I understand, here's what you're trying to do. Here's how we've helped others. Hey, just using some industry averages for a company your size. We did not say, hey, Procter & Gamble, we feel like we can save you this. Then use those industry averages. Say, use some industry averages. A 1% improvement's worth this. Or for other customers, we've been able to improve that 3 to 5%. And again, for a company your size, it'd be worth this. We're not promising it, but you're just throwing it out there to provide this financial focus much sooner. Because if you just go in and say, oh, we're confident we can save you 200 million, that meeting's going to be over pretty quickly.
Let me present a case to you and see how you might think through this. So this is a case that we're working on right now, and it's a chemical company that has a new product that is it's more sustainable, but it has there's kind of a difficult value proposition behind it. So it's called mass balanced, which is not so important, but it basically means that you're presenting something as 100% sustainable. But the reality is that the batch is like maybe 5% renewable goods. You're mixing that with 95% kind of virgin material, so petrochemical material. And then you're saying, okay, we're going to you as the customer A, we're going to allocate 100% of the sustainable benefit. And to all the other customers that we sell this batch to, we're not going to allocate any of the benefit. So that's the mass balance approach. There's a little bit of a challenge in explaining the proposition there. And that's challenge number one. And challenge number two is that in the end, it's a more expensive solution. So there really is not a direct financial benefit. You're selling this around kind of strategic positioning, right? You want to be viewed as a sustainable OEM that's using good materials. And so that becomes then very particular to the company, where you need to understand, what is this company communicating to their investors, their institutional investors, about their 2030 sustainability goals and so forth? Because you can't just go there and say, we're going to save X number of dollars for you, or when you have situations like this where you have maybe a complex proposition, and then you have more of a potentially a strategic benefit for the customer, but not easily defined direct financial benefit. How do you go about thinking through the right approach to communicate?
So glad you brought up ESG because a lot of our customers are now asking, can you provide us more ESG data? And as you know, a lot of these investment companies or advisory services are actually assigning ESG scores, breaking it down into three components. And so in something like that, because it's hard to say, well, if you do this, your sales are going to grow this much more because the people you're selling to are going to love you so much more. So what I do in that case is one, so I'm selling this new product. The people I'm selling to, have they made commitments to some zero carbon footprint by 2030, 2040, whatever it might be? So one, is it top of mind for them? Because if it's not, or they got this really low ESG score, it's like, you know what, you're just gonna be wasting your time. I mean, they're not serious about this. So what I like to do is say, okay, so first of all, confirm, we're on the same page. Are we both committed to the S part of ESG as an example? And then what I like to do is say, look, it's hard. It's hard to say that if you start offering these products that are more sustainable, that your customers are going to want to buy more. So what I do, I work it backwards and say, okay, look, here's going to be your increased cost. This is not cost savings. Okay, it's going to be increased cost, but we can work backwards and say, well, given your profit margin, what would have to be the incremental revenues for this thing just to break even? And at least, so Eric, what that does at least says, we're talking about $1 billion or we're talking about $100 million. Executives are smart. They know their customers and say, we think that's in the range of reasonableness, or no, $1 billion is crazy. Then it's really more up to them about, what is their commitment to ESG. So a lot of these situations, like security is another one. It's really hard. You can say, well, here's the average cost of a breach, this and that. But, some of these things are like very, very hard, like marketing, brand awareness. So what I like to do is work backwards and at least give someone a starting point to say, do you think could we generate this much more in revenues as an example, or could we reduce this much more in cost somewhere else in the organization? So at least a starting point. And then, from that, if they say, look, we just really don't know, but it's something we think we ought to do, then you say, okay, here's the cost of doing it, like branding, right? So I'm a big believer in this break-even analysis. One, make sure there's alignment. Second thing is, do we know what the cost is? We usually know what the cost is. And then how much more, in this example that you just gave, would that customer who I'm selling to, how much more would they want to buy from us because of this, because of their perception, what they think people are going to perceive them in the markets?
No, I think that's a smart way to approach this. And you have, these companies, obviously they have often large portfolios of products, and the ESG focus might be on, a couple categories or a couple products within a category. Do you think it's reasonable to try to communicate that having, one category or a couple products in a particular category as kind of strongly branded around ESG would have a benefit for the company as a whole in terms of kind of improving the brand equity of the company, and also then might have some benefit on other products that are not being impacted by this? Or would you typically focus specifically, kind of look at it on a product by product basis or a category by category basis when you're trying to evaluate this calculation that you've just outlined?
Eric, you raise a great question. And because again, a lot of our clients were asking about more ESG information, which, you can get, there's a lot of different sources. And so we've done research, and it's really at a kind of a high level, because that's one of the questions I ask, being a finance type, to our customers is, okay, so if you do all this, right, are you going to sell more, or which is mainly going to be a branding thing? The verdict is still really out on that, if you are more focused on ESG, that people are going to buy more of your product, or you're going to do this or that or whatever. So I don't have a really good answer to that. I just know that from the research, there's some high-level research that indicates that if you're perceived as being more ESG-like, that you'll sell more, but the correlation is still very, very low. So I don't have a good way to answer that, except there really has to be that commitment to say this is something we feel is right. But there's a very low correlation between ESG and we sell more, we leverage our costs, so we're more profitable, those type of things.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think for the end consumer, whether it's B2B or B2C, I think this whole ESG topic is still a bit fuzzy. So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves in the.
Exactly. And I think there's more, there's some companies, not a lot, that now on the consumer side is saying, okay, here's the carbon footprint associated with this, anywhere from making it, clothing, you continue to wash it, whatever it might be. It's kind of like the caloric intake, but it's still in such an early stages. I think to say there's a correlation between that and driving revenues is, the verdict is still out.
Okay, well, let's say if we shift the conversation a little bit, what are your thoughts on the impact of COVID on the sales process and the process of building credibility and trust and relationships, and how has that impacted how we should be doing sales today?
It's been a significant impact. I mean, already before COVID, I think it was like 70% of sales were really virtual, which to me is kind of sad because if you and I are going to be partners, I want to get to know you and everything. So what we're finding is that almost all of our customers over the last 2 years, everything is virtual. So it's really, I think, more challenging to develop those personal relationships. So what it means is that, I have to more quickly say, all right, Eric, I understand these are your goals. You're trying to expand profit margins. Much more quickly, I got to tell you, here's where we've done it before. And then what we are seeing is more and more is that people are saying, well, give me an idea of the financial benefits. So it's really required sellers and sales organizations. I want to put all this burden on sellers. Again, it's a team sport. Is that to very more quickly get to, here's how we can help you. Here's what we've done before. Here's how we can help you. Hey, using some industry averages, it might be worth this much money. So they've got to more quickly get to, tell me how you're aligned with my goals and strategies. Tell me what are the business benefits, and then ultimately what are the financial benefits. And I don't see this. We got some customers that are now seeing customers face to face again, but the vast majority of them are saying, I mean, like in our case, we used to do like, I don't know how many dozens of workshops worldwide. Everything's virtual. And this week, I found out there's 2 scheduled for this year, but I don't see that changing. Same thing in the sales world. Just tell me how you're aligned with what I'm doing, where you've done this before, and give me some insights into the financial benefits. So you got to be even more precise and more quickly get to what they want to think about. You don't have time to go play golf and go to dinner and all those things you used to do, which was not bad. It's just, I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It might mean that companies are making more value-based decisions if they're making it based on this proposition rather than who they like the most. But I guess it depends where you sit in that conversation. If you're a very
I like it.
okay, this is great. Maybe the last question before we jump into your company and understanding more specifically what you're doing. Can we discuss the topic of building a business case? And maybe we can discuss this from the perspective of a traditional kind of CapEx based technology investment and then a SaaS based, because I think that's a new complexity that a lot of companies, also that the customer organizations are struggling with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The dynamics have changed so much when you start talking about SaaS. So the first part of that is what most people miss in a business case. First of all, they think of it as a business case as opposed to a business plan. So the first part of building a business case or business plan or motivation for change, whatever you want to call it, is what I like to call what is the qualitative analysis, right? So tell me how this aligns with our company goals. Tell me what has to be our change management plan, right? So tell me what are the critical success factors. Tell me what has to go right, for this thing to work, because it all looks good on paper. The technology looks wonderful on paper, but tell me what I have to do to get the end users bought into this, because a lot of enterprise asset management, for example, I have friends that sell that. They implement it, but then you still got the engineers in the plants that won't let go of their clipboards, and they're recording all this stuff, so you don't get any benefit. So the very first part is, what is the qualitative benefits of this? And I've been doing this for many, many years, and I can't tell you what the balance is between the qualitative critical success factors, alignment with goals and strategies, and the financial piece, which is the other 50%. But I can tell you, having built maybe hundreds of business cases over my life, having worked with a lot of CFOs, if you don't pass the qualitative part, you don't earn the right to talk about the financial piece. Okay. So what gets left out a lot of these business cases, people want to immediately jump to, here's the ROI, here's the cash flow benefit, here's the cost of delay. Us finance types are going to listen to you until you've convinced us, hey, this really makes sense for my company from this business perspective. Now, when we start looking at things like, okay, now let's talk about the financial piece, that world has completely changed. I mean, who wants to put $20 million into a bunch of routers, and then it's kind of up to the buyer to figure out, oh, are we going to get a good yield on this? So what we're seeing more and more is that people are talking about either, here's the SaaS model, as you know, we're going to pay for consumption. Oh, and by the way, we want to see benefit a lot faster, right? Before we invested that $30 million and you told me, hey, it's going to take you 18, 24 months to get your money back. Now it's like, okay, once it's implemented, I want to start getting my money back like immediately, okay? Those dynamics have changed completely in the sense of people wanting a much shorter payback around that. They want to see a much shorter time to benefits, as an example. They don't want to have this big fixed cost sitting there, because more and more internally, these decision makers are being held accountable. Hey, Eric, you spent the $30 million. What kind of return did we get on that? So what you're seeing is that, especially with the SaaS, and that's mainly what we see now. We see very few, hey, plunk a whole bunch of money into hardware, these solutions, or perpetual software licenses. I mean, so much of that has moved to the SaaS world that it's really the focus on how do we help them get that return much, much faster. And then, what is the impact on the key metrics like earnings per share and those type of things. But I'm trying to think, I got to tell you, we deal with lots of companies, and I can't remember the last time in the last 3 or 4 years we saw kind of a traditional business case where put a whole bunch of money into your data center and then we hope you're successful.
Yeah, makes sense. When you get into more specific targets, so financial targets or operational targets, at that point, you also start to need to collect more information from the customer in order to make these relevant. What's your feeling about the right timing for that? Is that something that you should try to do, especially if we're over the internet, like during kind of initial sales conversations, to say, share with me some of your high level metrics and I'll let you know, based on benchmarks, what we can get? Or is it more do that later once you can maybe do a pilot? When is the right time to, because then that starts to get a little bit more sensitive, but obviously you need to cross that bridge. So what's the time?
So what we're finding, it's more mid-funnel, because once you demonstrated you've done it somewhere else and you got these case studies, in an ideal world, it's hard to do. They get to talk to different folks, but yeah, they actually helped us save the 10%. So once you built the credibility and once you've introduced the financial dimension into, so let's say, for example, I'm selling into consumer product goods, and I know the industry average for consumer product goods is capacity utilization of, I'm just making this up, like 90%. All right. I'd say, look, Eric, this is all based on industry averages. I can't give you a more precise number until you and I work together, because you need to get the customer's fingerprints on it. What we find is once you've established that credibility, once you've said, look, I'm being very honest, this is all based upon industry averages. Here's where we've done it before, 3 to 5% improvement. But I really can't give you a more refined number until you and I work together. And what we find a lot of times, people will earlier on in that funnel give you those numbers. Now, some companies, to be perfectly honest, they just say, look, here's the deal. Okay, we understand what you're doing for us. We're not going to give you those numbers. You tell us how much it costs, and then we'll figure out if we want to buy it or not. So there's still companies like that. I know some that you just they're just not going to give you the numbers. That's it. But more and more, what we find is that buyers want sales organizations to be successful. They don't want to have 10 different sales organizations. They know that, hey, listen, we can have these true partners. Both of us will be more successful. But I advocate all the time, once you built the credibility, once you've established some financial potential benefits using industry averages, ask. Say, I can't give you a more precise number, Eric. I want you and I to be the builder of this business case. We just don't want to bring our consultants and have them build it. So I'm finding more and more people will open up once you've done that.
Okay, great. Well, let's now turn towards your company, FinListics. Maybe we can start with the value proposition. So what are the problems? I mean, I guess we've been discussing them to an extent, but what are the problems that you're solving and for who?
This is great. So the vast majority of our companies are some way related to technology, right? Is that how do you utilize technology really to solve problems? In fact, I tell our customers all the time, quit selling technology and start solving customer problems. So the problems that we solve for our customers is if you listen to folks, everyone wants to call higher. Everyone knows that now there's more stakeholders. So how do we cut across those different stakeholders? Everybody wants to know what is the financial benefits of our solutions. And the other aspect of that, Eric, is let's say, for example, one of our customers, traditionally they provided supply chain solutions, right? And if you were to say, hey, Eric, you've got 15 minutes to prep for this call to meet the VP of supply chain at Tesco, as an example, they could go over there and have a great conversation. And then what they did is they came up with this new solution for omni-channel that all of a sudden, not just supply chain was involved, but you had marketing was involved. You had whoever was leading their omni-channel. You had store operations. So what we find is that typically enterprise sellers are very comfortable talking to one buying group, but nowadays you got to cut across that. So the other challenge that we address is, okay, here's how you call higher. Here's how you talk across these different channels. Here's what you talk about. And then here's how you tailor the message for those individual buyers. And ultimately, when you build your business case, here are all the considerations that should be included in that. So those are the key issues that we solve.
Okay, got you. And how do you do this? Is this service-based? Is it technology-based or a combination?
Yes, it's a combination. So what we do is we have a platform, a sales intelligence platform that's called Client IQ. Okay. And so let's say as an example, I was calling on Toyota Industry, right? Not Toyota Motors, Toyota Industry. And what we found in the book we wrote is that executives want you to understand their financial performance, not be a financial expert, but are my revenues going up, my profit margins going down, what aspects of cost management. So what we do is we provide a platform that literally in a matter of seconds, I could type in Toyota Industries and it will say, oh, here's what they've done over the last 5 years. Oh, if they could go back to their best performing year, it'd be worth this. Oh, here's how they compare to their peers, So it helps them very quickly get this executive insights because all executives are focused on finance. I mean, it's the language of business. And then what we've done for 25 different industries says, okay, well, let's get underneath. Let's say, like IoT has a huge impact on cost of goods sold, right? Materials, labor, overhead. Then what we do is we help them understand in a common sense way, because most of these people are not finance people. Most of these people are not operations people. Maybe I was a psychology major or something. So then we break it down and say, oh, okay, well, here's the different folks associated with those different metrics. And here are their different operational KPIs. And then what we do is we customize the platform to say, oh, well, you're selling sensors as an example, or you're selling cloud, that you can have the data. Oh, you're selling analytics around all this performance, machine health information. So what we help them do is link their solutions to specific financial metrics, to specific initiatives within the different stakeholders. And then we also help them create what are some questions I ought to be asking Eric? Eric's is in operations and production. I'd be asking them these kind of probing questions. And then ultimately what we do is we put some valuation around that. So that's really the platform side. The other thing that we're very, very fortunate to do is we have a bench of about 12 former executives that are now coaches worldwide. And so, even if I understand all this financial stuff and the operation stuff, I've never talked to a chief operating officer as an example, or I've never talked to someone in store operations. So what they do is they then say, look, we're not teaching you the tool, but we're going to teach you is the output from the tool, the insights from the tool. How do you use that with an executive? And you're not going to go in there and give them a financial history lesson. They don't want to hear that. So Those are really the main things that we do to help these sales organizations, as I always say, be more relevant to executive buyers. Because most executive buyers think that sellers, I mentioned this earlier, 80% of them don't understand their business. So we want to, those people other than the 80%, we want to push them into that percentage that executives say, yeah, this makes a lot more sense.
Okay, very smart tool. Yeah, I was working for a management consultancy about 10 years ago, and we had this very complex Excel tool where we'd scrape data from one of the financial reporting tools, and then we'd show this kind of ROIC analysis of, if you improve this metric, it'll have this impact on your profitability and so forth. And it was a bit like magic to the customer, but it took a lot of time, and it was this really finicky Excel document where if you have like one cell is the wrong data, everything breaks. And it sounds like this is kind of to at least one of the features that you're doing here, but maybe in a much more user friendly, dynamic way.
Because we have anywhere from field sellers using it. So it's like, look, we're not going to get in like return on invested capital. If you said that to a field seller, they'd be like, oh my gosh, it's worse than I thought. But then we also have like the value consultants or value engineers. If they want to go deeper, sure, go ahead and go deeper. But, for example, we do surveys all the time about the value we add. It's something like almost 100% of the users of the tool say, they save so much more time on the research part. They can spend much more time around the sales strategy. They can spend much more time around talking to the customers. In fact, what's really interesting is one of the stats, and I always say people sell, not tools. So I'm not saying it's because of client IQ, but one of the stats we got is 89% of people utilizing the platform report deal size of 20% and higher. And I think part of that, I'm convinced of this, is I actually get to spend more time engaging with the customer. And at the same time, I can do a much better job of articulating the true value of whatever I'm trying to sell.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, so much of a salesperson's time is spent doing kind of basic admin, right? As opposed to talking to people.
Absolutely. And that's what a lot of times I don't like to use the stat about it saved them time doing research, because you and I both know, you've lived this, I'm sure. To really, for that first meeting, you're going to spend 20 plus hours. And what are they doing financially? What are their goals and strategies? The one I like is, how are their executives compensated? And so, what you find is a lot of sellers just say, I don't have 20 hours to do this. I got 5 accounts, forget it. I'm just going to go in. I'm not saying wing it. I'm just going to go in and, hey, what keeps you awake at night? So I just think the fact you can automate that process is, we know it's a great benefit. So you can actually do a better job of selling versus doing research, which a lot of highly paid salesperson, do you really want them looking at the financial statements, figuring out what cost of goods sold is, or days in inventories? I don't think so. Just give it to them.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And you even have this data like executive comp. And where are you pulling this from? I guess this is from kind of different databases that have annual reports. Is this primarily public company information then?
It is. And so to answer your question, we have a team of researchers that look at, I don't know how many companies a year. I mean, it's in the hundreds. And so they'll say, here's the common goals and strategies. Here's the executive compensation. Here's their initiatives, those type of things. So what we do is, for publicly traded companies, we'll say, hey, here's the most common, metrics that they're compensated on. And then, we have links over to, like in the US, it's called the proxy statement. In Europe, it's governance, all those kind of things. So if you want to dig down, take an extra 5 minutes and find out exactly what that is, sure, have at it. Now, for private companies, and we are always doing surveys, and a lot of our companies, our customers, they report 50% of their revenues are from private companies. Huge, right? So what we do is we actually have links to private companies, and you type in the name. So it will say, here's our best guesstimate of what their revenues are. But then to me, the most important part is they're in this industry. They're in making packaging equipment, as an example. So what we then do is we have literally thousands of industries worldwide, right? So it's broken down by geo, revenue size, whatever it is. So what it would say is, hey, Eric, look, this is a private company, and let's say they're making industrial products, okay? Here's our best guess of their revenue size. And what I find out is most sellers know their customer's revenue size. So then what it does is, in this industry, cost of goods sold, their direct costs have kind of trended upwards. Well, hey, that's a great question to ask, the person at that company. Say, hey, one of the things we've noticed in this industry is direct costs have kind of trended upwards. Have you experienced the same thing? Right. And then it also has things like, well, in this industry, I'm going to stick with this cost goods sold industry. The average cost is 70% revenues, but the better performers at 65, where do you fall? And you'd be surprised how often people will share that with you. But what they want to know from you is, hey, Eric, tell me the people are at 65 versus 70. What are they doing different? What are they doing different from us? So what you can do is use this industry data, have a great conversation. The KPIs I was talking to you about earlier. So let's say you got a private company, they're 100 million, they're industrial products. I can say, look, for a company your size, using industry averages, each 1% improvement's worth this. How does that sound to your own internal analysis? So what you find is, first of all, a lot of times private companies love this data, right? Because they're not getting that kind of benchmarking data. And in the seller, without going into a lot of detail, can say, I've noticed costs have trended upwards. Same thing happened to you. Oh, yours is also. Well, we understand it's like labor cost or transportation costs. So using industry data can get you pretty far. And I can tell you all kinds of stories about that, how that's been successful over the last, we've been doing it for 20 years. But yeah, it's an easier conversation than people think.
Yeah. Okay, great. So it gives you kind of this discussion guide, and companies certainly love benchmarking and understanding where they fit and where they're outperforming or underperforming. So yeah, that's a great way to drive a conversation. Maybe we can get into a couple cases here. So please choose a couple that you think would be interesting to the audience. But it would be great to understand where they were before, what you did with them, and then how this changed, maybe how they communicate.
A number of our companies that we work with have already said, look, we've got to do something around value selling, or we call insight-led selling. But 20% of our people are there. What I find is 20% will never get it. It doesn't say anything about their intelligence. It's just not their DNA. So it's really that 60%. I'm trying to think of a specific example. Yeah. They were very much feature function focused. They had a great technology. They did all this stuff around statistical analysis and forecasting and all those type of things. But they were kind of stuck talking to folks that loved statistics. So what we did, we worked with them to say, look, there's other people out there that want to hear your story, but they don't want to get into Fourier transformations and backward forecasting, all these things. They look at it like, different eyes, three eyes. So what we did with that company is say, okay, first of all, what is it you do, right? Here's the industries you sell into. What are they trying to get accomplished? And then we work with them to come up with these different use cases that would actually allow them to talk to different people, elevate the conversation. Because, the people in the basement, we call them propeller heads. God bless them, right? They're not the decision makers, and you're not going to get bigger deals from them. But I remember one example specifically where they were talking to someone in retail, and what the retail company is trying to do is a better job of forecasting. So initially they went in and talked about all their technology and reducing mean error forecast or absolute forecast error, all this other kind of stuff. And they somehow got a conversation with people in marketing. And the person was like, I have no clue what you're talking about. So we worked with them and said, ask the person in marketing what they want. And what the person in marketing said, hey, I want to do a better job of forecasting so we have a higher sell-through rate, so we have lower markdowns. And so just one small example where we said, look, don't talk to them about their technology. Tell them how you've helped others improve their forecasting, and that resulted in higher sell-through rates, lower markdowns, those type of things. So there's quite a few examples. Like we've helped companies working with their sales leaders, working with sales enablement, really transform themselves from a feature function. Which, by the way, Eric, I mentioned we're always doing surveys. We did one recently, and we asked that question: how often can you align what you do with a customer's goals? Only 25% said they consistently do that. 30% said they still focus on features and functions. So we're all about the company that provided automation for manufacturing. It was always a technical discussion. Almost never did they calculate an ROI. Almost never did they talk about, oh, I understand your goal is to improve operational efficiencies, and here's how improving OEE will do that. And so that's what we do. We work with companies to say, okay, change how you think about your customers, change how you talk to your customers, and ultimately show them the financial benefits.
Got it. Yeah, great. Are you working mostly with quite large, mature companies, or also with like venture-backed tech companies? What does the portfolio look like?
It's all over the place. I mean, we got some of the big guys out there like the IBMs and the Ciscos and the Microsoft, which we love. We love them, but we've also got technology companies. There's one that we signed up, I think it was 2 years ago. They were about 50 million, venture backed, went public. Oh my God! So I wish I'd bought some of the stock, and so that they've been growing like at 200% a year. And if you look at our list, our ideal customer profile, I mean, it's all over the place from, the billion-dollar companies to, hey, here's one that's 30 million, 50 million. They just raised $100 million and they got a valuation of 2 billion. They're a unicorn plus. So what we do is we look for, are they providing tangible solutions? Have they bought into customer first, insight-led selling? And the third thing we look at is, have they gone through some type of value selling education ideally. And so it's all over the place. I mean, like I said, on our ICP list, I think there's some at 20, 30 million, because we want to be there when they grow. We're a small company, right? I love small companies. We want to help them grow. We want to be a partner as they go from their 20 to 100 to, in fact, I was talking to one today. They're at, I think they closed out last year at 350 million, which is pretty good size. But they share with us, look, over the next 3 years, we want to get to 1 billion. Help us do that. We can help you, obviously, as a partner. So it's really all over the place.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think a lot of, on this podcast, I interview a lot of venture-backed companies that are kind of in the B, C round. So getting into that growth phase, and a lot of them are coming from a very technical background, like very, very engineering-focused founders. They have a great solution, and then they have to make that transition to, okay, how do we then, like you said, grow 200% a year for the next 5 years? That's really a mindset change, and it's no longer the founders going out there kind of pitching, right? It's now they have to build a sales force that can sell the product, not just sell the story.
That's why we bring in our coaches. Like one of our coaches is a former senior VP of supply chain for a well-known consumer products companies for Asia Pacific. She helped manage billions of dollars of revenue. So we bring them in and say, look, this is Dawn. She has bought hundreds of $1,000,000 of product and services and all this stuff over the years. Let her tell you how she wants to be sold to. In fact, she don't want to be sold to. She wants to tell you how you solve her problems. Oh, by the way, here's how we're going to do it. So yeah, it's really a change. We see this all the time. People with super, super cool technology, and they're stuck selling to the wrong people. You got, for example, real quick, with the one company, what they did is help people develop apps like in half the time. And so they were going to the CIO saying, hey, do you want to cut your app development cost by 50%? Oh man, that'd be awesome. And I asked them, I said, well, what do these apps do? And they said, well, we've just helped this one bank and it's going to take in mortgage requests, mortgage proposals. I said, well, how much faster did you get to the market? Oh my God, it was like a year. I said, how much revenue do you think they generate over that year? I said, go talk to the people in marketing. I mean, keep your friends in IT. Marketing's the one's going to benefit from this. So yeah, a lot of times you've got to really change your mindset around who to talk to and how you message it.
Well, great, Stephen. I really enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think is critical for folks to know?
We covered a lot, and it's a blatant plug, but I would strongly recommend, if you like this, as I mentioned, we published this book last year called Insight-Led Selling. It's an Amazon bestseller, and look it up. Insight-Led Selling. My name, Stephen Timme, Melody Ashley, and we've got it for the ebook. It's like at $1.99, so we're not making any money, but Melody and I, it's a passion of ours. We want people to be successful. I have this professor background in me. I still got that mad professor. I just think everyone should be informed. So what I would strongly recommend is do that. What they can also do, if they want to sample, if they reach out to us at info@finlistics.com, and I'll provide you the information, and say that you were on Industrial IoT Spotlight, we will send you complimentary a PDF of the introduction to the book, which already has a lot of good information in it. So do that. The other thing I would say is that we do about 2 podcasts, webinars a month bring in executives, like I'm doing one tomorrow on how do you turn customer insights into value. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. No charge for these things. Very powerful. Talking about executives, real world stuff. So, I would also recommend that. So reach out to us, info@finlistics.com. Follow FinListics on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. And then send us an email, info@finlistics.com. Get your free book. Go to FinListics. There's all kinds of free stuff out there.
Cool. Yeah, sounds like a lot of for folks to follow up on. So I'll put all that in the show notes. Man, Stefan, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Great. Eric, thank you so much. And again, I want to thank everyone for spending time with Eric and me. And I hope you got a good ROI on your time invested.
Thanks for tuning into another edition of the IoT Spotlight podcast. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, please email us at team@iotone.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research, strategy, or training initiative that you would like to discuss, you can email me directly at erik.walenza@iotone.com. Thank you.